Welcome to Blaze News, the mandate day 16. I'm Jill Savage. Tonight on the agenda, the Senate confirmed Tulsi Gabbard to serve as the Director of National Intelligence in a 52-48 vote, and Mitch McConnell was the only Republican to vote no. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said that the war between Ukraine and Russia must end. He also clarified that U.S. troops will not be involved and explained that Ukraine will not join NATO. Watch.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement.
In a Truth Social post, Trump revealed that he had a highly productive call with Vladimir Putin, where the two agreed that the war must come to an end. Trump also said that he had a good conversation with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelenskyy, confirming that Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio will meet with both Russian and Ukrainian delegates in Munich on Friday. The Trump administration has also secured the release of Mark Fogel from Russian custody and at least one U.S. citizen who was detained in Belarus. When asked why the incarcerated Americans abroad are being released now, Special Envoy Adam Boehler had this to say.
And so now we've made it clear all Americans are coming home. And I want to also be clear, we've turned that attention to Hamas. And I want anybody, Hamas included, to understand that when you hold our citizens, we're coming for them at any cost. And the president has said that. There isn't an or else there, and we will act on that.
And there was yet another USAID scandal uncovered. An investigation from Alex Gutentag and Michael Schellenberger found a USAID-run front group drove the Trump-Russia collusion hoax.
First, you saw Russiagate, the idea, this wild conspiracy theory that President Trump was somehow controlled through a sex blackmail operation by the Russians. But then we also saw a very elaborate effort to do exactly what they had done abroad, creating small committees of experts to decide what the truth was and demand censorship on the basis of it.
And the term constitutional crisis has been thrown out a lot as of late. Here's White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt's response.
The real constitutional crisis is taking place within our judicial branch, where district court judges in liberal districts across the country are abusing their power to unilaterally block President Trump's basic executive authority. We believe these judges are acting as judicial activists rather than honest arbiters of the law. And they have issued at least 12 injunctions against this administration in the past 14 days, often without citing any evidence or grounds for their lawsuits. This is part of a larger concerted effort by Democrat activists and nothing more than the continuation of the weaponization of justice against President Trump.
But the Trump administration might be staging a constitutional comeback as a federal judge ruled that President Trump has the constitutional authority to freeze funds. Watch this.
Essentially, the court is confirming what the Trump administration has maintained and what common sense can project, which is that within the confines of regulatory and normal authority, of course, you can do what you want with your own money, and you don't need a court's approval to do so.
It's another huge day in the news world, that's for sure. Let's go ahead and bring in Blaze News Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson. So we see that Tulsi Gabbard got through. No surprise that Mitch McConnell was the only Republican to vote no for Tulsi.
No surprise. Of course, I'm not clear on if it was Mitch McConnell who voted no or one of his staffers who told him to. I'm not sure what condition he's in. I don't know who to believe anymore, given that Washington, D.C., the old guard are all octogenarians. But yes, I mean, he doesn't care anymore, or his staff doesn't care anymore, and they're just voting their conscience, as twisted as it is.
Yeah, and then Pete Hegseth making waves, talking about the war between Ukraine and Russia. It must come to an end. He said, I'm out here doing Donald Trump's will as the Secretary of Defense. And there's been a lot of movement on that front right now. Yeah, so this was one of the things that Trump said from the very beginning. He would move very quickly, right, and just stop bloodshed. This has been a horrific war. American media really has not done a good job explaining just how brutal this conflict has been for both sides. And I don't know about you, there's a lot of things to talk about here. One is, last night, if anyone was up, you saw the president, because he doesn't go to sleep, kind of like other people I know. He's always working, right? And
He's there. He brings in this guy who's been in prison, who's free, back in the United States, and all of a sudden starts connecting this to the larger issues of stopping this conflict that has really, affected the entire world. And in the space of a few days, now you see this narrative arc start, and it starts with a bang, with Putin in a goodwill gesture releasing, this hostage. So this is just diametrically opposed to everything we've experienced in the last 4 years with, I don't want to say do nothing, but sort of pro forma, routine performances. It's all fake. And now it's just transparent. There's Rubio with the hostage, right? There's the guy who got the prisoner home. There's President Trump. You're in the Oval. Next day, Secretary of Defense talking about, no, things are changing. We've talked to Putin. We've talked to Zelenskyy, and we're moving. It's active, and it's more than a breath of fresh air. It's a second American Revolution. This is an entirely different era. This is an entirely different American style of leadership.
Well, as you like to say, we can just do things now. And we're going to talk to Chris Bedford a little bit later in the show about the judges and everything that's happening there. But, we do see a win today with a federal judge saying that Trump can actually go through. He has the constitutional authority to freeze funds. So, 2 steps back, 1 step forward right now as the judges are concerned?
Well, what these judges are doing, they've been doing for a long time. It's pure politics. It's a political statement when they issue these injunctions. I mean, this is ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense constitutionally. What they're doing is actually unconstitutional. They need to be slapped down. They need to be mocked. They need to be pilloried, because the idea that the executive doesn't have this authority is absolutely ridiculous. And what they're doing is they're destroying the credibility of the courts because they're politicizing the courts. So they're actually reducing their own power and making it less likely that increasing amounts of people in charge listen to them, because it's absolute garbage that the president doesn't have this authority. There's all kinds of debates we can have about executive authority and where it's complicated, but this isn't one of them, and they're not going to get anywhere with this.
I feel like we talk about the FBI a lot on the show. When we come back, we're going to balance it out with the CIA. A former counterterrorism officer will weigh in on Trump's vision for the CIA. Next. Well, 85% of that grass-fed beef that you find in stores is actually imported. That's thanks to a 2015 law change. Now, meat that's from foreign countries can be labeled product of the United States just because it's packaged here. And that means that grocery store meat is often full of antibiotics, hormones, and seed oils. But Good Ranchers is different. They're 100% American meat. They have no hidden additives, no seed oils. They're just high-quality protein that you can get delivered straight to your door. Their beef, chicken, and seafood are all born, raised, and harvested right in the United States, so you know exactly where your food comes from. And their seed oil-free chicken nuggets are officially back. And they're packed with clean, delicious flavor that you don't want to miss. And you can get them on their own, or you can get them also in a box as well as an add-on to any order. But the best part, Good Ranchers delivers straight to your door, so you can skip the grocery store and get the farm-to-table quality while supporting American ranchers. And right now, they have their New Year, New Meat promo. You can get free ground beef, chicken breast, or wild-caught salmon in every order for a year, plus $25 off with code Jill at checkout. Don't wait, go order now. Good Ranchers, American meat delivered. Well, we know the federal government is slashing budgets left and right. And earlier this month, we told you how the CIA offered to buy out its entire workforce. So what would be left? Here to break it down for us is Drew Berquist. He's a former counterterrorism officer and host of This Is My Show with Drew Berquist. So Drew, thanks so much for joining us. So with the rise of the CIA, right? If this goes to ashes, do we even need this around anymore?
Well, thanks for having me, first and foremost. Yeah, I mean, look, we do. We need the functions and capabilities, the good parts, if you will, of the agency and some of my former colleagues. But we don't need what it's become over time, this politicized, weaponized, just behemoth in D.C. The part that happens and exists back here in Washington and just in the U.S. writ large is a absolute mess. Some of the stuff that happens overseas, a different story. That's good, and we need parts of that. Where it lands and how it all ends up is I guess TBD. But this is definitely an interesting story that's unfolding.
So, Drew, everyone has their reform plan, out and about these days. Actually, there should be more of them. I mean, this is a time where everyone is, for good reason, rethinking what these different organs of the government ought to be doing, right? And so it's about getting rid of the people who shouldn't be there, getting rid of these bad things. But I keep on hammering on, we got to have a vision for what the purpose is, right? We got to go back to what the purpose of these organizations are and then reform them accordingly. So in your view, what should Ratcliffe do? What is that purpose? And then what falls away?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think as is the case with almost all of the organizations in DC, there's so much bloat, there's so much overstaffing. So you've got to address that. And you get to what you're talking about. What is the mission? What do we need this entity or this organization to do? And in the case of the CIA, it's collecting vital intelligence that provides that information to the president, the National Security Council, on how we should address certain issues and proceed ahead. And then there's the more clandestine stuff that we do where we're taking out bad guys and doing God's work overseas all around the world that most people don't know about. And it's those things. It needs to be precise. It needs to be, laser specific, very precise operations that address U.S. national security concerns and or U.S. national security interests. And that's the same thing across the board for all these organizations, whether you're talking about the military or FBI or you name it. But it has to be very specific. And the tools that work at the agency, I keep saying this to so many on my show and so many other shows that I go on, the tools that really work at the agency we need. They're critical to our national security. The problem is like so many other things, that's like a few percentage points, right? And then the rest of it is just, you have multiple, moments from Office Space where you're asking people and seeing people in the building. It's like, what is it that you'd say you do here? Like, I don't understand what your function is. And so we need to get rid of all of that and then just let the operators go operate and do the critical work that does keep our country safe.
That makes total sense to me. Just as a follow-up, though, what should he do to keep it for this agency that does do some vital things in the national interest, as you point out? What should he do to stop it from being involved in really domestic affairs? I think that's what's terrified people over the years, right? Yeah. Is that this is intelligence looking to the outside and the rest of the world. As you point out, there still is a lot of talent on the side of going out and getting things done out in the world. But I think what most Americans are afraid that it has happened and don't like about the direction is this shouldn't have much to do with what's going on inside our borders at all. No?
100%. You're absolutely right. Well, the CIA is chartered for overseas. Everyone's got their charter and their specific left and right limits of what they can and cannot do. And the agency's chartered for overseas operations. So there's never really, with the rare exception where obviously, a terrorist that's been tracked has come overseas, at which point then the way it should be is they collaborate with FBI or some other, DOJ component to get things done. But there's not really a charter or a mission for the CIA within the United States. So that has to go away. And you have to get away. A lot of this will go away with reducing the bloat, right? You get rid of all these people who have an office in D.C. and they go to meeting after meeting and they sit at the Starbucks that's in the first floor of Langley and they talk about things that they think are doing things, but they're not really, like they're just a bunch of mouth breathers. You get rid of that and you get rid of that bloat, and that will take care of most of the stuff that happens here at home, because it's those people who kind of go rogue. The leadership and some of these other people that the leadership leverages because they're just willing pawns in the game to do the stuff that happens here at home. Most of the real operational folks are focused on operations overseas. So I think that you will address some of those concerns by getting rid of the Karens and the Chads that work back here that no one knows what they even do.
Well, Drew, I want to ask you about the White House press briefing today because they brought up the Trump assassination. And I thought, man, it's been a minute since we've actually talked about that. One of the reporters was asking, are we going to get some more transparency on this? And Karoline Leavitt, the press secretary, said she'll leave it up to the president, but she believes in full transparency. We will get some more information. So what can we expect to see on that regard?
Well, first of all, I think it's great because, this thing has been memory hold. We've had 2 assassination attempts on a presidential candidate, and it just has all been memory hold. So much of the stories that led up to this election, memory hold. And also thank you to you guys on the left and within the government who tried to do it, because you gave us the election victory. But I think that, look, I would have told you weeks ago, pre-inauguration, don't expect much, because that's just what we're used to, right? We're used to all these promises, and we hope that we're going to get more information, and we hope we're going to make progress on certain issues or certain policies, and we just historically don't, because DC is a failure of a town. But what we've seen in these few weeks is so mind-blowing, and so it's just like this amazing thing that's going on where we're getting access to all this information. So now I would say I would expect that we're actually going to get, will we get names? Maybe not, but will we get, hey, the Bureau or DOJ or this organization or Secret Service was involved in this, and here's where these lapses occurred. I think that we're going to get more than we would have in any previous administration before. What that is, I don't know, because I haven't heard anything from the inside to tell you for sure. But I do think that we're going to get more than we ever would have in the past.
That would be amazing. I'm with you on that. Everyone's attitude, by the way, right? Pre and post. Before, it's like, well, nothing ever happens. And then that transition team did a heck of a lot of work in the last 3 months, and we're watching it all now. And now we're all imagining things we couldn't have imagined. For instance, Tulsi, DNI. That is something that was unimaginable not very long ago. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's great. I'll say this. I think that the DNI has never lived up to, I was never a big proponent of the DNI. I think adding layers of bureaucracy, DHS, DNI, all the things that happened looking at UW weren't necessarily great for this country. But once they're there, if we're going to keep them, we need to make them useful. And to make them useful, we have to have useful and good, smart people who are in that position. I think that there's a lot the DNI can do right to kind of collaborate and get rid of some of the mission creep that happens between FBI and CIA, for example, some of the other intelligence organizations that are collecting intelligence. And I think that she's just an absolutely wonderful person for the job. I did not think that she was going to make it through, so I'm thrilled to see that she did. I'm thrilled at the prospect of RFK and others making it through. It's kind of like pre and post inauguration stuff. Mm-hmm. Pre inauguration, you tell me, or let's say post cabinet picks. You tell me that all these people are going to make it through, and I laugh at you. And there's just so much winning going on. I see these people going through. We all do. It's like, man, we might get RFK through too. We might get Cash through. Like, let's just see how this all shakes out. It continues to be good, but I think that the DNI, operationally speaking, doesn't have a whole lot that it brings to bear. But there is a lot that it can do to kind of help clean up some of the stuff that has been going on. And I think Tulsi's going to be great at that.
Yeah, I want to go back to that because you bring up some important points, and one of the points of our show, the mandate, is to help explain to people every day, what is going on, what's the structure of the beast that the agenda, the mandate, is trying to be implemented and tame, right, across this colossus. So it's really important to explain this. I mean, you said earlier, part of CIA's mission is to provide intelligence to the executive, and DNI, what's DNI's mission? How do you see those two agencies? How do you explain that to regular people?
So basically what happened is there was, and there always will be, it's like, you think of Army, Navy, you think of any of these kind of rivalries where we're all really on the same team, but there's a rivalry there. And you get mission creep where someone who's supposed to, the FBI's chartered to do law enforcement operations, counterintelligence and intelligence operations here at home. And then overseas stuff is us. And, they wear suits, and then, there's the cool stuff that happens overseas that we do. And there's just this clash. And what happens is you have people trying to do the same job. So I'm meeting this asset who's got information to this. Well, I'm meeting this asset who's got the same thing. And rather than collaborate and coordinate, it was a race to whoever can get the best information fastest, and really not even the best. It was usually just, if we're being honest, the fastest information, so they get credit, because a lot of these government people just want promotions, and they want to play that game. So the DNI was created with that mindset, is let's deconflict all this, let's bring it together. The problem is it was never going to work because that rivalry is there. So when you tell senior level agency people, take the DCI, which has been a mess of a position, granted, over the last several decades here, going back even further than that, in fact. But you tell the DCI, who's the most powerful person in terms of government agencies outside of the president, that now he's got a new boss who doesn't work in his building, and the same thing for the chief at the bureau, and it just never was going to really work. So you have analysts who are now plopped over there, and now you're supposed to be the final analyst there, where the agency was supposed to be before. So there's a culture. It was a cultural nightmare when it worked. It was a bureaucratic nightmare because it added another layer, more meetings, more red tape, and it just is, unfortunately, the way the government works. The same thing happened with DHS. Did we need DHS? No, we didn't. Has it been successful since? No, it really hasn't. It's all been kind of a mess. But D&I think, was actually probably one of the biggest failures during that era because it was the most unnecessary. If people would just stay in their lanes and stick to their charters, it would be irrelevant. But again, if we're going to have it, let's have someone good run it.
Absolutely. Drew, if we go back to our theme of pre and post, I think USAID is one of the biggest headline grabbers that we've seen so far. There is USAID front group that drove the Trump-Russia collusion hoax. So do you think that the FBI was aware that this was a government-funded smear campaign when it launched the Mueller probe?
I think that there's probably elements within. I think what a lot of people do on the outside is tend to assume you've got a clearance, you work for this organization, you know a lot of things that are going on. And it really is pretty, sometimes in a good way, sometimes to our own detriment. It's siphoned off into silos pretty well, where if you're not in this program and read into this program, you don't know, which is how these things happen and why these organizations have such credibility issues. You have great FBI agents, you have great CIA officers who don't know that leadership or this program or this group is doing these nefarious things that are going to crush the credibility of organizations forever. So I think that there's individuals who knew and were aware, and certainly when it comes to the agency, there's individuals who knew and were aware, but I don't think it's everyone sitting around the water cooler getting a drink at the end of the day, wish we weren't doing that. I think it is pretty specific in who knows, and hopefully those people are gone, and hopefully they're punished to the greatest extent possible, because we got to set new precedents here.
All right, last question. I want you to respond to this quote. I saw it today from Mike Benz. He said, if it's too dirty for the CIA, they give it to USAID.
Yeah, well, think of this. We use cutouts and cover organizations all over to funnel things to hide our hand in operations. So, and it's true. We get involved in some bad stuff, and sometimes you want us involved in that bad stuff because it results in safety for America. But when things get taken out of context and things get skewed and you have the wrong actors in there, then all of a sudden it gets pretty bad. And when you're having to move it into organizations like this, and it was no surprise to me when I saw this, because we had seen it internally, and it's not just them. There's other NGOs. There's so many organizations out there that people are aware of. Some even talked about on commercials on TV where you should donate money, where they're being used for nefarious actions because it hides the hand of the U.S. government. So it doesn't surprise me, and that's just how it works. Rarely is the lion's share of the funding that happens for covert operations doesn't really flow through the agency. It's done through all these cutouts, some of which are portraying themselves as something that they're not.
Drew Berquist, we really appreciate your time today. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
MP, when you hear it all just laid out there like that, we know it's all a dirty business, but I feel grimy after that, right? When he explains everything, it's I wish some of these things I just didn't know.
Well, we've been at this game for a long time, and we've been involved in dirty business for a long time. And Drew made a really important point that, and it's part of what I've been banging on about on the show for a while now since the mandate started. And that's some of these functions are valid. You do want, right? You want something that is going to allow the government to both, spy and gather intelligence throughout the world. And you do want to act in a covert manner and have an agency that does that, or some function of the government does that. So the question now is, as he kind of alludes to this throughout everything Drew just said, there's some good things that people are still doing, right, in the CIA. There's good stuff out there. So how can we reform it in a way where we just achieve those goals and get rid of all the rest with as little grime as possible and clean it up? It's not going to be an easy task.
We have to expose all of it. That's part of the show. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Don't go anywhere. It's going to be Chris Bedford time. He'll break down the Democrat lawfare against the MAGA mandate just ahead. After decades of not doing its job, Congress is now trying to take back power from the executive branch through the court system. Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford wrote about this in his latest Beltway brief, and he joins us now. So, Chris, how are Democrats trying to use Congress now and the courts to go after Trump?
Well, it's been an interesting and ironic story to see Congress trying to suddenly curtail, Democrats trying to suddenly curtail the power of the executive. This has not been something they've been interested in doing. Matt and I's mutual friend, the late, great Michael Uhlman, talked at length about this during his career, about the complete decline over the last 50 years of actual real oversight by Congress, the surrendering of their authority. I mean, the founders set up this system expecting people to be jealous of their power, but actually the Congress has been tempted more by television cameras and fundraising and hanging out with rich people and insider trading. And they're not that really jealous of the power of the executive. And you know what? We're just going to find out a little bit more of why. It's because the executive has been doing what Democrats want, regardless of who is in the White House. And it's been that way for decades. That's why you see Joe Biden trying to name people career civil servants as opposed to political nominees when he's on his way out the door. That's why you see Democrats flipping out about people losing their jobs. That's why where I live and the county next to me and the county next to that and the county next to that are all on the watch list for trans bathrooms and trans pornography in children's elementary schools. These are Democrat-run cities here in Washington, D.C., and it's all because the civil service is essentially on their side. Now, having surrendered their power to the executive, knowing that it's going to just continuously do what they want, Democrats are now really putting separation of powers in danger. You keep on hearing them scream, it's a constitutional crisis. What the actual crisis, if there is one, and it's not there yet, is that they're with Democrat backing, Democrat judges, and Democrat districts. District judges are now going there and saying the executive branch of the U.S. government is not allowed to run the executive branch. And when you've literally got a judge in Manhattan issuing an order that political appointees do not have access to information in their own department. Now, who does have access to that information, if not the people who run it? It's a complete rebellion against the power of the presidency. It's a complete overreach by judiciary. It's absolutely lawless, and it threatens the actual separation of powers were any of it to go through. Most of these cases are going to get knocked down. Once they get to Supreme Court, John Roberts, Chief Justice, for all of his flaws, does have a strong opinion of executive authority. He's going to err with the White House on a lot of these things. But here's one of the issues that the White House has. The Supreme Court is not going to make a ruling that judges can't make these as nationwide bans. They can't just control the executive with a written order from Hawaii unless the Trump administration loses one of its cases on the merits. So, for example, let's say Trump says dogs are now cats. Supreme Court says that's true, bounce it back to the lower courts, it's over. That's the only question that's considered. But if the Supreme Court says, actually, dogs are not cats, that's not true. But the Hawaiian judge that signed the order putting the ban on him, you're not allowed to do that for anyone except for the people represented specifically in your suits. Nationwide injunctions are not a real thing. They are invented, but for lawfare purposes, they're invented by the administrative state. And, this is something the Democrats actually agree with, because when you saw a Texas judge rule against abortion pills and issue a nationwide injunction, they were like, ignore it. Completely ignore it. He has no power to do that. And you know what? He actually probably didn't. They had a legal case there. But that has been forgotten in the age of Trump. And that's what's setting us up for where we are right now.
Chris, so glad you mentioned the late, great Michael Uhlman, gentleman, scholar, PhD, lawyer, worked in the Reagan administration, was the first guy in the transition team to ask Clarence Thomas if he'd ever thought about being a Supreme Court justice. The man,
he's a legend.
Guys like that knew what they were talking about when they talked about separation of powers at an intellectual and a practical level. So let's drill into this a little bit. Let's nerd out a little bit here. I think if Jill will let me. Let me tell a story. A story from the before times when a young Matthew Peterson
long time ago.
went to Congress before Trump, in the before times, before Trump appeared on the scene. And I went to this event with a bunch of people we both know, and it was a meeting of congressional muckety-muck, so a lot of key staffers from some of the more powerful people in Congress. And they were talking about what to do about healthcare at the time. Remember Obamacare? They're all Republicans, okay? And one of the guys there, who's from the Uhlman, the Claremont, the Hillsdale sort of crowd, is looking at them as they're talking. And they're all talking. These are congressional, high-ranking staffers, powerful people in Congress. And they're all talking about how the courts will take care of the problem. ultimately, Obamacare is unconstitutional, whatever, but, I'm hoping this will go through the courts this way, and then the courts will take care of the problem. In other words, it's the reverse image of exactly what you're talking about with the Democrats in Congress now going to the courts to solve the problem. And the Hillsdale Claremont guy, kind of stopped them all and looked at them like, isn't this the United States Congress? What if you use the power of Congress to pass a frickin' law? God forbid, right? And I wonder, in this case, they're doing the same thing. Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter. If they're in Congress, the first thing they think about a lot of times is not what they can do, right? Because they don't consider themselves passing laws. They don't consider themselves as having serious oversight power. But they look to the courts and say the courts should adjudicate this, or I should use the courts, rightly or wrongly, against my enemies. So do you think in this case, they're going to find out, I'm assuming, that the district court, these things mean nothing. Like you said, it's not a thing. They're probably not going to have an effect. But could we actually get to the point, if Trump keeps pushing, where Congress actually tries to use its power to legislate again?
Wouldn't that be interesting? They're afraid of even the process. They're afraid of having votes. They're afraid of talking about anything that's just not already been decided. They're afraid of hard questions, to your point. I guarantee you that if there was a time machine and Republicans thought that Roe v. Wade was ever actually going to get repealed, they would not have confirmed Brett Kavanaugh. They came out for him, claiming, they go to the marches, they say this, but even when they say they want to fight in the courts, the reality is they don't want to fight at all. Republicans generally treat their majority like a shiny trophy that they want to put on their mantle and protect at all costs. Don't let the kids touch it. Don't let the wife touch it. And Democrats usually use their majority and say, we're going to lose this, but we're going to change the country forever. And that's going to be our actual mark on history. They're willing to push through on that. But listen, if Democrats themselves use the power of the purse and are actually willing to do these sorts of things, and that might be a healthy thing for the Republic in general, at least as far as the civics course goes, and it could actually activate some kind of jealousy in Congress. But here's the issue, and Ullman talked about this a great deal, is they've forgotten how. I know it seems strange in the age of the internet. You look at these ancient civilizations and say, how could we forget knowledge? But we forget it every day, especially in Washington, D.C. Really, in the last couple of years of media, it seems like people forget things week to week, major events that seems to be important are completely put in the background. And a lot of Congress has forgotten how to legislate. Some of the things you would actually need to do to reassert Congress, and this is something that conservatives have stupidly been appalled at previously, double its budget. Make it so congressmen actually have a decent salary. They have to maintain 2 different houses. They have to do all these things. And here's the thing that drives them crazy and makes them corrupt. They hang out with rich people all day, every day. They're the only people, them and reporters, who hang out with folks who are that far out of their class regularly. You don't see that anywhere else. And increase the staff budgets dramatically. Don't be sending money back to Treasury and issue a press release, look at how fiscally conservative I am. You need 40 and 50 and 60-year-old people in your office who are absolute experts in their field. You don't want them on K Street lobbying against the U.S. people. You don't want them making all the money that pays for all the mansions in McLean out there. So you need to pay them a decent wage, make it respectable, have them come in here and do battle with the administrative state. If you start to get a Congress that's serious like that and is willing to say, all right, I know you're yelling at the street Tea Party, but I need really talented people. I need to retain them. I need to fight the federal government. I need to relearn these skills. It is written down. It is in books. Some of the most effective staffers, some of whom we know, I go to their house and they're reading 100-year-old books on the operations of the U.S. Senate because these are actually tools that can be used. The groups over at Conservative Partnership Institute, Jim the Mintz Group, teach courses on how to use things that are completely forgotten by the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, different parliamentary tools. That's one of the things that Mitch McConnell actually was a master at. Before him, Harry Reid was a master of this. Parliamentary procedure, the histories of the Senate, and how to twist things and get your way. And as you'll notice, Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell both got their way a great deal. So if you can get the Congress to begin to do that again, and there have been some positive signs, well, that'd be a great step.
Yeah, I love that. You're like everybody that's out there on Capitol Hill. They've forgotten all the things. But my favorite line that you're talking about was your unelected 23-year-old staffers that are running Capitol Hill that was there in today's Beltway Brief. So if we're saving so much money in all these other places right now. I mean, maybe some of these staffers on the Hill can actually get a pay raise and we can get some more experience back in there. And then you have people that are ready to actually go up and battle the deep state, because that's what we need at this point in time, are people that aren't just, 23 years old, that are just fresh out of college, that are trying to come up here and figure out how to take down this giant behemoth.
Flashing their staff IDs at local bars like it's going to get them some kind of favor, that they're somehow special. It's so cringeworthy. I used to bounce in Washington, D.C. down in Georgetown, and I saw some pretty wild stuff, the high up opinions these young staffers have of themselves. But yeah, you need that experience. Make congressional jobs respectable again, because the spending problem is not in those salaries. The spending problem is in the administrative state. The spending problem is in the deep state. That's where you need the experienced people who are willing to put their lives out there and go after it.
Yeah, before we let you go, Pete Hegseth was out there talking today, and he was just going out there and saying, there's still the Pentagon, there's still going to be the deep state. We're going to try and stop this war between Ukraine and Russia. But we know that money is still going to figure out some way to flow through, Bedford. We know it's going to happen, right?
And what's sick and what's been exposed more over the past couple of years is that the people who've been paying all this money, the people who claim we must fight for democracy, and anyone who questions it's a tool of Putin, they never thought that Ukraine was going to win this war. It was considered unwinnable by Boris Johnson, Lloyd Austin, Joe Biden. People didn't expect that. They looked at this, and you see this, Lindsey Graham's actually crazy enough to say it out loud. They looked at this as a way to beat up Russia, to bleed Russia. And they use other people's armies, little green men, other people's lives, other people's sons and daughters, wives, mothers, sisters, aunts and uncles to go out there into a meat grinder that America would pay for all this corruption that you see all throughout the Ukrainian government. And of course, that Russia has a fair share of all those things as well. And they never even thought they were going to win. So when they start to roll their eyes and get mad at Pete Hegseth for saying, no, we're not doing NATO. And by the way, you could have actually negotiated a better truce with Russia originally when Ukraine was negotiating before it was torpedoed by Boris Johnson, that villain. Then you realize that they're full of it, that they're not actually serious, that they never actually wanted peace. This is just a proxy war using Europeans to fight other Europeans. And hopefully Hegseth can really do something about that with Donald Trump's negotiations.
Well, I hope that the snow in D.C. doesn't affect your interview. I know you're going to have Congressman Brandon Gill on this show for later in the week. He's one of our favorite congressmen because he came on the show and he was like, I'm going to count my success based on the number of illegals that get deported in my first 2 years. And I'm like, you know what? If you're going out there and saying that before you've even gone in and taken the oath, we can get along with you.
He's wonderful. I was in his office earlier this week setting up an interview. The snow has screwed up his schedule, so I'm working to get that right now. But we may have a very special guest on in his stead.
All right. I'll let that go because I think I know. And I think that the people at home will be very excited for that as well. Thanks so much for your time, Bedford. We'll catch you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Don't go anywhere. What are Americans' favorite things about Trump's first 3 weeks in office? We'll have your answers right after this. Well, there's so much winning that is happening lately. So this morning, I wanted to ask you, what is your favorite thing that Trump has done in his first 3 weeks in office? And Stacey replied, Elon Musk and DOGE. I mean, I can't argue with that. We are loving the DOGE talk here on the show.
We have to remember where this started, right? I mean, Doge was a joke. It was Dogecoin. It was the funny dog meme. It was a meme coin. And now look at what we got. Doge is all grown up and saving the world.
But Elon has taken that little dog meme coin and he put something, I'm sure, through Grok. And it's like the dog with the American flag behind it, and everything is just getting all patriotic with Doge right now.
It's like memeing into existence a government agency that's trying to save America.
And yet that one is the most effective thing that we have seen in how many decades, America?
Stacey is justifiably happy.
Absolutely. Blake says, getting rid of paper straws. Now, I don't know if this is the absolute top, but this is top 5 for sure on the list right now. Those paper straws are terrible.
I love the way that Trump just grabbed onto this. I mean, it's the kind of thing where, you know what, and another thing, while we're at it, let's deal with this problem. And you remember when that first started happening, everyone was surprised. You'd be kind of sitting there going, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Oh, for the environment? What? Really? And take a second, like, I guess so, plastic's bad. But as Trump says, I don't think that the sharks munching in the ocean are too concerned. We can go back to plastic.
We're going to be just fine. Bullet rounds it out today, saying the executive order banning transgender surgeries on minors. Can't overstate how important that is. And a close second is defining officially what a male and female is, something that they did in the Bible way, way, way long time ago.
Yeah, sort of by existing, male and female defined themselves as what the reality is. And this is hugely important because this is the coalition of sanity. This is the realignment. The new coalition is about bringing sanity back. And the first place you have to start is with the basics, and that's that men and women are different, God forbid, and we should not be mutilating people in accordance with their mental illness or, psychopathologies.
We started this little segment with a meme. Let's end with a meme as well, and it's the one with the face, and it's a pretend face, and they're like, "Oh, you're gonna trans. We're not worried about transing the kids," and then it's like the crying mad face. Yes. It's like they aren't even letting us trans the kids anymore.
Yes, no, you can see them crying about it now, and it's the most vicious, dumb, evil, malicious sort of weird mixture of things that you can imagine. Because remember, these are people who said people will die if you don't allow us to mutilate children. People will die and be persecuted if you don't allow men to go in the women's bathrooms. I mean, this was a fever dream, a madness, a nightmare. And he's right. These kinds of actions, the government coming out and saying, no, we're not going to do this anymore. And men and women, that's it. And that's your genders. That's enough. That's reality. Hugely important because in order to get to a place of sanity, you have to say the truth out loud and mean it. And that's what's happening.
Well, on any given day, malicious, dumb, and evil could describe the members of Congress and what they're trying to do. Take us home.
Yes. So Chris Bedford and I earlier had a very interesting discussion about separation of powers. And I just want to hammer this home because it is this important. The missing element in the fight against the administrative state or the fourth branch of government, the real unconstitutional thing that has warped the Constitution into something that's almost unrecognizable 100 years later since the progressives started, is Congress. So Trump is going to use the powers of the presidency, unlike recalcitrant Republican politicians in the past, to see if he can do what no Republican president has ever yet been able to do, which is to roll back this unelected fourth branch of government that usurps the power, the constitutional rightful power of the three branches, right? That's Trump's mission. And he has the political will to push as hard as possible to do so. The courts, we all recognize, have power. The Supreme Court, so many major issues end up going up to the Supreme Court, and everyone uses the courts and no one questions their power, although the left would love to kneecap the courts if they would in a heartbeat if they thought it necessary. But the courts still exist and they have their power. The missing element in the secret ingredient is Congress. Congress has given its power away. It has unconstitutionally delegated its proper lawmaking authority to all these unelected officials in all these agencies and departments throughout the United States federal government. And what they do is they issue regulations. They effectively are lawmaking bodies. They make law. They make regulation that you have to follow, that I have to follow, that has the force of the rule of law. But they do so without anyone voting on anything. And the executive, right, Republican, Democrat comes in, they can't get rid of these people, and Congress has given them that lawmaking authority, and then Congress acts as a servant of these agencies and organizations. You see it now with USAID. All these Democratic politicians are out there yelling because their masters, they're creatures of the administrative state who used to receive all this money, are saying, how dare you let this happen? You need to defend this agency with all these unelected bureaucrats. Okay. So how do you resurrect or resuscitate Congress when it's effectively dead? As Chris was saying, they don't pass budgets. They're not good at passing legislation. They pass these huge omnibus bills. They don't even know how. They've forgotten how to use their power. What he said bears repeating. You have people who are smart reading 100-year-old books so that they can learn how Congress should use its power because everyone's forgotten how to do that in the United States Congress. Okay, so how do you resuscitate it? What do you do? Well, you have to threaten its power. And how do you do that? You do exactly what Trump did. You say, you know what? I'm getting rid of this agency. You don't like that, do you? Because the agency goes to Congress and riles them all up, and they go on these stupid protests and trying to reenact the 60s after 50, 60 years, and all the stupid things you've seen on TV. Next, they go to the court. Then they go to the courts, and they say, judges, you got to do something. The courts need to resolve this. You should issue an injunction and stop this tyrant fascist Trump from using his executive power. And the courts ultimately are not going to be able to stop this because they're going to have to say that at the end of the day, no, this is plenary power. This is executive power. The president can do this. What's the next step? Oh, I don't know. God forbid Congress use its power to legislate and maximize its power to do oversight. And here's what I want to say, and it sounds kind of crazy, but Chris and I agree on this. Even if the Democrats do that, that's a good thing because it makes everyone in Congress, the Republicans, realize, wait a minute, in Congress, we should use all of our legislative powers to get what we want and not depend on the courts and not just act as agents of this large-scale bureaucracy. So even if this gets the Democrats to actually respond in Congress by trying to use the powers of Congress again, that will help resuscitate a healthy separation of powers, a healthy Congress, and we can still fight that off, right, in many ways, but it will help Republicans in Congress learn, no, we need to use the power of Congress. And oh, by the way, we'll all remember, Congress is the one with lawmaking authority. Congress is the one that should be making the laws, not these unelected bureaucrats and all these agencies that are currently in power now. Making Congress great again is one of the only ways we have to fight the administrative state.
You said Trump is going to get rid of all these agencies and nobody likes that in Congress. Well, it reminds me of an interview that Representative Tim Burchett did. He said, yeah, they don't like it because their wife or girlfriend is usually working for one of these agencies and then they go home at night and then they get yelled at because now all the funding for their thing, their agency, is no longer going to be there. And there's a lot of problems, I think, right now in Washington, D.C.
Oh, yeah, I think there's a lot of...
Beyond what we even think.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of fights around the kitchen table. A lot of people looking up, as someone said the other day, looking up criminal defense attorney, Google searches from the Washington, D.C. area. And it's exactly right. Their bread is buttered there. So when you threaten that, you force them to act. And hey, if that's what it takes, great. And even if it's the left trying to do it, if you actually want to use the powers of Congress again, that gets Congress, it brings it back to life. And then it can be ultimately used for good.
One of the things that Karoline Leavitt said today at her press conference, she said, if outlets in this room keep pushing lies, we will hold them accountable. You also now have somebody that is in the presidency and that is actually going to be out there as a press secretary that is pushing the truth and saying, we don't care if you're going to spew lies. We're not going to stand for that anymore. What a refreshing thing to see.
That's such a great, I mean, we haven't talked about that yet. It's such a great point to bring. I mean, speaking the truth is important, and she's doing that every day. And when she does it, it's almost like Republican or Democrat. You're like, oh, remember when people were articulate and were able to say things? Just say things. Just say true things.
You can say true things, and the American people are going to have your back. It's a crazy concept, but it's working right now in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow night.